Good morning to all you brave souls who are willing to talk about content audits on a parade day, especially. It's pretty exciting here in Seattle right now. Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. I think what I would add is that I do teach content strategy in information architecture at the UW iSchool, and I teach undergraduates. It's a great way to get people who are younger and younger ready for work in this field. But because I teach undergraduates, I'm not always used to people paying attention to me or being awake while I talk. So you might look at your screens. It's really okay. And the other thing that I do is I work at Content Insight, and we've created an automated content inventory tool that does audits and inventories. And that's really one of the ways I got into thinking about audits and all the things you could possibly do with audits and how they became a big part of my life. I have a big, long title with a lot of big words, and I'm going to do this in less than 30 minutes. So we'll see. For me, this all got started when I was thinking about an onion. When I think about words like sustainable, holistic, strategy, and what influences me and how I think about it, well, I did go to the iSchool, and I studied information science, and one of my professors was Raya Fidel. With a woman named Peterson, she has worked on the onion model of information behavior, especially in cognitive work analysis and how we work. That onion model, to me, makes so much more sense than a top-down tree model or some sort of hierarchy. And instead, we think about things that come from our core and go out, that when we're talking about information, there are so many layers involved. And what I noticed every time I'm building a model, whether or not it's an org chart or an audience chart or thinking about how we relate to people, every time for me it was always a circle over and over again. From our core of who we are to all the people that we reach. And more through the past years where I've done more community management than anything else, I think about all those places that community involves us. And to me, it's no longer even Venn diagrams. It's all kinds of overlapping, connected circles and all the ways in which we need to create conversations that reach all the possible layers of our content. So this idea that I could talk about sustainable, holistic content strategy with a content audit is based on 3 premises. The first idea is that content audits will help us build a content strategy. To be sustainable, a content strategy understands that content exists in a life cycle. This is Aaron Schema's version of a life cycle. It's one of my favorites. There are many different copies out there. But that means to be sustainable, we have to think about our goals. We have to think about our systems that we use to create and deliver content, our resources, our workflow, our timelines, our budgets, building all the right tools to support the people who make content within our systems, as well as the people we want to reach with content. But there are other life cycles, there are other ways to look at this process, and that's usually the problem that I see when I go to an organization. I could see things like someone is hired to run their website, probably also handle all of their thank yous for donors and stuff like that. And then they add social media onto the job description. You're talking about a 23-year-old who went from intern to this role. Now they're in charge of basically all of your online communication, and they don't know how to do it. The CMS is Joomla, let's say. There are all kinds of reasons that they can't really keep up with the website, so they put their emphasis on their Facebook page. And they're doing a great job. They're getting likes, and she's good at it, and she likes it. So they just abandon the website. Everybody sort of abandons the website. It's no one's responsibility anymore. And you're just like, well, we'll just wait till it totally breaks, and we have to do a redesign. But there's no connection between is what she's doing on Facebook meaning anything to this organization? Is it helping bring in donations? Is it helping attract people to what we do? No one was thinking about it. No one was talking about it. Or I've seen organizations where people have a very strict mission and vision, and they only put their goals out, and they try to make every channel fit that goal. And they've got no tread. No one is paying attention to what they're doing socially because all they do is push one thing. That's why I try to think about audits existing in a larger life cycle. My second premise is that there is an ecosystem for content. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Information architecture is no longer about having a model of a house. I mean, for me, it's either like urban planning, where you're talking about a moving city, or just the idea of being a living, breathing organism. Your content changes, it grows, it changes with the relationships that you have with people around it. So when we audit, we are always really going beyond one channel. We're looking at the relationship of how that content relates. That's the word holistic. How our relationship to our time and our place and our person affect the whole of what we're doing. There are a lot of other words for holistic. You might be familiar with some of these. I am very fond of the term multi-channel. It makes a lot of sense to me. Though I thought we created the term omni-channel at an IA summit one year in a hotel bar, but apparently it's become quite popular. UX should always be holistic. We are not just making a product. We're building an experience. And that happens in a location, in a retail store. It happens with our staff when they talk to people. It happens on every channel that we use. And there's no point in looking at those things as separated, even if we assign different people to do different channels. So this is my third thing. When people are resistant to the idea of doing content audits, just try to remember the first time we make something, even if we're building it off the very best user research, an absolute wonderful foundation of personas, we're still guessing. I mean, it can be educated guesses, but they are suppositions. When we get to the stage where we're able to audit content or conversations that we're having, we're testing. It's a form of test. And that helps us know that we're reaching our goals and our audiences and providing the experience that we want to have. So this is when I ask you if you have done a manual content audit. And you can just groan or raise your hand. I'm assuming a lot of you are here because you might have to do an audit, or you feel kind of like this about it. And then think of all the reasons why you wouldn't do it. Think of all the resistance that you might have to doing an audit. The clients, the stakeholder, the sales manager, the team members, all of the reasons that could prevent you from adding this to your scope or your scale, the timeline, the budget. A lot of people don't want to do an audit. And I think that because it is a form of test, it's one of the best ways to prove you're doing things, that you can't really create a sustainable strategy without one. Your audit's going to support your strategy by proving how you are reaching your goals, and maybe helping you define what those are in a better way just by doing it. They're going to tell you if you're talking to your users in the right way. Have you set up standards, the things that you're really trying to reach that are contextual to your organization, and are you meeting those? Are you following the best practices that are available in the industry that people like Sarah Wachner can tell you about? Are you making connections? Are you fitting all those channels together? Are you fitting the people and the content together? And I think more and more now, are you driving a conversation? Are you going beyond being a broadcaster to discussing things with people, moving them, and having them move you, and adjusting to what's being said? So what do you look for when you're doing an audit? I mean, first, the question is, do I know what those goals are, and am I meeting them? Am I finding gaps between all kinds of relationships? Once I find that gap, am I doing something to fulfill a need? Am I actually putting something of value out into the marketplace? Am I different enough? Am I doing too little? Am I really not there? Or am I doing too much and it's not doing me any good? And this is really a big one for me. A lot of people can put out a lot of content, but it's maybe not moving their mission forward or maybe not serving their audiences. And you've got to ask, is this the right fit for your resources? Is this the right fit for who you have on board with you? Then I ask, where are you? Sometimes we don't even really know that. And this audit process, especially in a multi-channel or holistic way, is one of the best ways for us to all know where we actually are, as well as what we're doing there. But I also believe that you do not have to do all the things, that there are different kinds of audits. They can each be customized to what your needs are, and that you can choose the right ones. And I want to tell you a little bit about what they are, the ones that I teach in my class. And I do have 35 students right now doing 5 audits. And they're doing it, and it's happening. But I hope that a little bit of this will also help get over any resistance you have to auditing and the people on your team's resistance to auditing. This is always the big question. that people ask me is, can your intern do an audit? We get some smiles and laughs on that. Well, I can tell you that one time I had a project that they did not set up anything right, and basically had 2 days to do an inventory, and they wanted a taxonomy by Monday, but we hadn't done user interviews, so I quit. It took me 2 rounds of quitting. I trained someone on their staff to do the audit, brought her to my house, showed her how to do it, and she just got up and left and said, no way, this isn't for me. I'm not doing that. It's not for everybody. When I think about interns and what they can do for you, you've still got to give them a really clear idea of what they need to evaluate and how to do it before they start. You've got to have a really good idea of what the outcomes you want to have from the audit are, and they've got to be invested in that. I couldn't do this much auditing if I didn't actually care. And if I didn't know things like when I was working on a healthcare website and I was removing just 5 redundant pages for every one action that someone could take, that was actually going to improve someone's experience. Someone who is in a health crisis was going to find care in a much better way, and that's why I was doing an audit. And I think you need to bring that to your interns, to yourself, to your team. You've got to care in order to do this stuff. And also, before you make that assignment, think about the layers. Think about how much you're going to audit, for how long, everything that's going to be a part of your criteria. And I like to think about what's that content that's closest to home. Usually a website. This is a space that we control, that I control, and I can take over the frequency of how things are published, but it's also the place where I really want to drive people to come. It's usually where I have my sales or my interactions with them. So I want to make sure that it's tip-top, and that's something that I can do, and that's a good reason to audit there. But there are lots of other different kinds of audits, and it just depends on what your needs are. And I just think about those layers going out, what's closest to my home and what I can control, and what gets farther and further away. So when you have to look at all these choices, I look at the scope. I look at the scope of my project, whether or not I'm in-house or out-of-house. And sometimes that depends on how much other stuff I have to do and how to fit this in and when I'm going to get there. And I think about the scale, how big I can go, how long I have. And you have to really find out if you have the resources to do what you want to do. So if you want to get 30 interns to come in, be ready for them and have it all mapped out before they start. The most common type of audit is quantitative, a content inventory. Really started with Jeff Veen, I think in 2002, wrote an article for Adaptive Path called A Mind-Numbing Odyssey. And it's a common idea that content audits are really awful, or content inventories. This one you can do manually. It used to be like you copy and paste every single URL, and you can try to have the user experience by doing that. But basically what you can get out of an inventory is a catalog, right, of everything maybe on your website. It tells you how much content you have, and it tells you where it is. And that's actually really useful information. And you do it in a spreadsheet. I know that tools are going to try to create other ways to do this, and that some people don't like spreadsheets, which is really crazy to me because it's a very useful tool, and I spend a lot of time in it. When we were building Content Insight, and some of the screen will be off, we also knew people didn't necessarily like spreadsheets, so we thought about other ways to do it. But mostly it's when you get that first inventory, being able to look at the first questions that you can answer, especially how much. How many pages do you have on a website, for example? And almost every project I've ever been on, the client thinks they have 300 pages, and they have 3,000. There's this exponential number. There's all these things that you didn't know that you had. It's also kind of nice and anonymous. It doesn't blame anybody for doing it. It's a very strict thing where you can all finally look and agree, yep, this is how much content we have. This is where it is. This is the spreadsheet we're working on in our class right now. Our client is Maker House, which is a local company. So you can't see the sides of it. You'll have to look on the slides later. But one of the points is you have a numbering system. That's sort of a unique identifier. That's a key that tells you this piece of content is unique, and this is where it lives. It can be in a hierarchical order to show you where it lives in the navigation of your website. We also want the URL. That's really important. That's location. And generally a title, because URL isn't always readable to us. And the fourth thing that Jeffrey Veen recommended we talk about are the types of content. And in this case, we're looking at images in HTML, but he really does mean the strict, is it an image from CSS, from JavaScript, from ASP. So very, very quantitative, no evaluation involved. I have kind of expanded this for my students into what I would call a technical audit, and that's taking that further from those 4 qualities of the numbering system, the URL, the title, and the type, into all the other information that you could collect about it that's still not evaluative. It's not judging. You're still just compiling information that you might have. And these are things that robots can get for you. Robots like SEO tools and our tool gather lots of additional information about your site as long as it's there, size, things like that. I also think about this being your opportunity to take all the metadata and attach it to your original qualitative inventory, as well as starting to think about some things that a robot can't tell you. When does this content expire? Who's in charge of it? What department does it belong to? The things that you actually have to take some time looking at the content or the organization to do, but it's still not judging the quality of that content. It's collecting more information about it. When you're doing audits, you really do need to have 2 screens. So that first audit that I quit twice, they gave me an 11-inch screen to do 3,000 pages. It was impossible. So I ended up having to cut and paste into Word and then take it home and do the spreadsheet at night. You want to be looking at 2 different things at once. When I think about getting more information beyond my original content inventory, I also want to think about what's attached to that page. So there are categories like the URL, like the type, the size, the server code status, what level it is, what sort of images, videos are attached to it, what tags or keywords I have involved with it. But I also like to be able to look at it at the same time. And this is our tool. So it shows you the whole screen. And I like to see the flow of the whole interface. What we did notice, especially in this audit, is I'm no longer looking at pages when I look at websites. I have to look at screens. I'm working on sites that might have been built for a responsive experience, and I have to break that down into what people experience for each screen. So I hashtag that. Like in this particular audit, they used Bookmarks to show us how to move down the screen. So we were able to create each of those as a page. So we don't just work on websites anymore. So I think it's really important that our audits or our inventories also find other ways for us to categorize the screen as an experience instead of just the page. Some of the things I look for in that technical audit, that navigation structure. My students do have to go through and find everything that a user would find as they go down the navigation. But we look for those subsections. We also look for the metadata. We take pages and we tear them apart to find all of the metadata. I think one of the best things my students said this year was, yeah, we find all this metadata, but we don't want to show it all to the user, right? Because then we would overwhelm their experience. And I was like, yes, there is a side that is hidden and there is a side that we show. But we still need to collect all this metadata so we can decide what we are going to show. So we do evaluative activities to make sure we know how to break down a page and find the metadata that we need. After we're done with the technical, we move on to a social audit. A little bit harder. I don't think there is as much said about how you're going to audit your social media experience. I end up having to make new templates every time I do one so that I can focus on that stuff. If you're the manager of the site, you have a benefit of getting analytics, especially from something like Facebook, that you can download that and start auditing, creating a template to check the evaluation after you get those. That's made it so much easier. With social, I tend to like sampling. I don't look at everything. I might take a month to 3 months because it's impossible to see everything. But, you know, what are you saying when you're on this channel? What are other people saying about you or in response to you? What kind of discussion are you having? As well as the basic follows, likes, and all those things that you can kind of see. The thing about social is, right, there's a million different channels. And they die, and they are born, and we have to decide which of them we are going to use. And before you do a social audit, you have to think about which ones you're going to review. When I do any kind of work like this, they usually have dead channels, and I want to find those. They have so many channels that exist that they've created or forgotten and are just sitting there, and I have to ask whether or not that's a really good thing to have, or people have created pages for them or about them that they didn't know about. So I think it's very important to go out and find everywhere they are socially and create that list. But I really like to think about what channels are most important to me, which channels are closest to my heart, and how am I going to use those. So if I don't have time to audit every single social channel, I'll look at the one that I'm most active on. And the Pew study just came out, 70% of online adults are on Facebook, 78% of people. So it's a really important channel to a lot of places. When I'm at a startup or somewhere like Maker House, where they have the money to pay for posts, then they're doing a great job on Facebook. And it's very important that we audit that situation. With some of the nonprofits who don't have the money to do that, it's a more difficult relationship. And we might look at how they're using Twitter, like this is my life for a lot of nonprofits. It's free. Also, the 140 characters means that we can generally get it done in a certain amount of time. I like to look at both of those channels. I think it is important to take the one that's getting more and more increasingly important and look at your Facebook presence and how to do that right, and then choose the secondary channels that you're going to look at in addition to that and figure out where they are and how close to your heart that they're going to be. And I create like a hierarchy of power to my audiences. Like who do I know of my users that's using these things? And I'm going to audit in order of importance as their use goes. Another type of audit, not about you, it's about your competitors or people you want to compare yourself to, affinities, potential partners. But knowing what's going out in the entire ecosystem is incredibly important. And competitive audits, where we tend to take usually 5 other organizations, they can help us establish benchmarks for best practices. They also are very useful in helping us differentiate, helping us answer the question about if we're adding unique value to the marketplace. We look at things like, well, what are people doing, but what are they not doing so that we can do that? What are they not doing that we do and we're not doing a good enough job of getting the word out about? Competitive audits help us a lot with gap analysis, but you also have to make them meaningful. So you have to think about a lot of criteria beforehand. And I see articles about competitive audits and they'll tell me what feature set things have, maybe price, but I actually need to know what they're doing with content. Like, there was a really great competitive audit that came out earlier and it said what a certain industry was using. It was like 70% of the industry is using video. And so, like, are they using it effectively? Are they making good videos? Is it working? Are they getting more customers because they're using video? I need to know those things. So I actually use content audits a lot, or competitive audits a lot, to look at tactics and whether or not they're going to work for me. This is a competitive audit by my student. You can ask me later her name, and I'll tell you to hire her. If you ever see her name come up, hire her right away. She thought of some really brilliant individual categories to look at when she was choosing how to compare her particular organization to others in the world. She also was very careful in establishing a key for how she was going to evaluate it. In a competitive audit, you can do a yes, no, do they have it, do they not? Or you can do a scale of 3 to 5 or 1 to 5 or whatever. You just have to set that scale beforehand. And you have to make sure other people are going to understand the scale that you're going to use. And before I start any sort of competition, I've got to put the things in ahead of time. I always also keep a qualitative journal when I'm doing competitive audits because there are a lot of insights that I get that can't be put down in a spreadsheet. So I have another sheet. I like to create an outcome sheet as well. What am I looking for to get out of this? Because I know that I'm going to have to give this information to other people. I want to be ready for that presentation. So a qualitative journal while I'm doing it and an outcome sheet to look at so that I can move this piece of information into something I can say right away. And then, finally, the qualitative audit. This is the one that asks, yes, you know, you have this content, and you know where it is, and you know a lot of technical information about it. Is it any good? And this is how you decide if what you're doing is making a difference. This is one of the spreadsheets from my class for qualitative audits. And I think each kind of line is a different thing that we could possibly be auditing, and it goes on to the side, and there are 6 worksheets. So this has got to be contextual. It's got to be based on you and your organization and what you need. And it's in unending things that you could possibly qualitatively audit, so it's important to choose those things ahead of time. I often look for the business goal, the personas, the user needs, as well as maybe some standards that I want to set or best practices that are out in the field. In a qualitative audit, I'm also thinking a lot about our multi-channel experience. I've gathered my inventories of social and of our web content and our competitors. So now I think about how all those things are connecting to each other. And we can think about our signal to noise, if we're just broadcasting, or if we're actually building relationships, talking about other people, talking about our customers, making it happen for them. Are we using those channels appropriately? And I look at the kind of top three. Are we clear? Is our content clear? Is it written well? Does the picture match the words? Very simple things. Also, is it consistent? Are we consistent in every channel? Do we have a voice and tone? Do we have a message hierarchy? Are we saying the same thing in person as we're saying on every kind of device that we could possibly put content on? Does every channel match back to home? But also, are we consistent in our frequency? I think this is incredibly important. Do we go on Twitter 1 week and then go away for a month and come back? Do we post a blog whenever we feel like it? Those levels that come into your editorial calendar are very important and give you some really important information when you're auditing for consistency. And finally, I think the most important thing about content strategy is that you want to be credible, that your site needs to be trustworthy. And this is actually a huge differentiator for the smaller business, certainly important in the nonprofit, and I think it's very important to startups. A lot of startups that I work with don't have any idea what content they want to share, and they're willing to do a lot of really icky practices in order to get signups. And we have to have a big talk about, well, do you want to keep those users after you get them, or are you just looking to get a big income investment and then walk out the door? And I don't like to work with those guys. So I look at our credibility and, again, set up those evaluative measures for how we're going to do that. What I really look for, and these are my things. Are you providing a mirror? Can your audiences see themselves in your content and your channels? Is it written for them? Is it created for them? Do you see their needs, their problems, their passions, and reflect it back? But you're a business, so it's also important that you're providing windows, a very retail-oriented idea. But how is your display working? Are you showing people what you have to offer? When they look in that window, do they see what they need? Do they see the relevance of their relationship with you and what you're providing? So can you feel the relevance? That's a good one for interns. And are you giving them something to do? Is there a way for them to come into your environment and take action? I really believe that your best content strategy is going to be about aiding decision-making and enabling action. You are going to help someone make a decision and let them take action on it. So you could have lots and lots of really great content, but without something for them to do, it doesn't matter. Calls to action, links, ways that you cross paths are very important things to look for in a multi-channel qualitative audit. And the ultimate, where I'd like that strategy to go after I do all this auditing, what I can look for a little bit, is the two-way mirror door. Okay, so this is where your client sees themselves in what you're doing and the voice that you're using and the reflection. They see you and what you have to offer, and they can actually get in while they do it. So to me, that two-way mirror door, I look for it in the audit, but it's usually what I'm going to try to get to. I want to make sure that I have all of those things, and that's how I'm connecting my channels. So how do you put the audit into that content lifecycle? For Aaron, it actually starts this process. And the next stage is strategy. So when you're auditing, when you're testing the content against all of those things, it's going to help you build a new strategy. And it should be the way that you choose to renew or possibly come up with reuse. It gives you all the information you need to tell you if you're meeting those goals, so you can change it, and you can make changes. And people ask, when can you start a content strategy? And in my class, we always start with someone who's just done a redesign without doing a content strategy, because I believe you can do it any time. It's always going to be okay for you to start on a content strategy, and it's always going to be okay for you to add audits into your governance and life cycle. If you can do inventory day, like I used to when I worked at a grocery store, or if you can have governance day and add that to your schedule, whatever you can do to make this renewal, this refreshing, this movement into strategy, And I've found it to be incredibly useful to me as a community manager. One, I know where everything is, so I can give people helpful links all the time. But I could also look in this week and I could tell you that I need to have an article about how to use games in content strategy. I need to get to that talk as well, because that was the biggest tweet I sent out this week. It was huge. Everybody wanted to know about how they could use games to teach technical communication. So all of those social channels also give me a lot of feedback about what people want to know and what they're going to do with it. So that is how I work the audits into the system. It's like that. The phoenix rising. It's a living organism. You know, our content should change. Web pages do die. We do need to make sure that we update them or archive them or remove them. We also need to make sure that we're using them to reach people. And we should look at all of our channels. And it's just this amazing opportunity when we're able to do one of these audits or all of them to come up with a better way to serve our business, which is things that my clients and stakeholders really like to hear about, but to help them understand why we do this to serve our audiences and make a better user experience for them by improving content or by removing content and by responding to what they're saying out into the world, and also differentiating us, proving our unique value, finding things that are missing that other people aren't providing, that we can or that we do and we should say more about, and look at how we're using all of our channels to just start a conversation and keep it going. So it's not fast or easy or cheap, and I know that you can have something that's fast or good or cheap. It's good, and you can do it fast, and you can do it cheap. But in the long run, you should be doing it. It will help all of your strategies come into place. So that's what I do, and that's me. You can follow me at Content Insight if you want to know about content inventories and audits. At Meaning Measure, that's me personally, where I make snarky comments about Oxford commas. Seems to be my thing. And we've got articles on our website. I'm always available via Skype. I talk about auditing all the time. It is my life. It is my baby. And I host the Seattle IA and UX meetup as well as Content Strategy Seattle. So you can find me at those places as well. So thank you very much. I feel like we have new people coming in. And if you have questions, find me in the hall, I think.